Yeah, thank you for having us. Yeah.
So let me start with two introductory slides. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of us with the new year, the quantum year 2025, and we start our first seminar this year, which is the third year of our Kharkiv Quantum Seminar. Today we'll have the talk open call for proposals with US Army Basic Science, not the talk, but rather three presentations by Jonathon Brame, Sarah Gamble, and Paul Baker. Sorry for the pronunciation, but I hope it's close. With this one slide, I would like to show short bio. Firstly, of Dr. Jonathon Brame. He is now the team lead for basic and applied research for the US Army Futures Command Atlantic Office, which coordinates international fundamental research and discovery between universities and Army labs and centers. Dr. Brame's degrees are in physics, Bachelor of Science from Brigham Young University, and civil and environmental engineering, where his PhD degree comes from Rice University. The second speaker is Dr. Sarah Gamble. She completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Florida. She received the Bachelor of Science degree in physics in 2003. She continued her education at Stanford University, where she received PhD in applied physics. Then she came to Army Research Office as the program manager for the Quantum Information Science program, which is quite close to the subject of our seminar. The next speaker, Dr. Paul Baker, serves as the Photonics, Electronics, and Quantum Sciences Extramural Competency Co-Lead at the Army Research Office. He functions as the extramural lead for foundational research and provides scientific expertise across a broad range of investments to support the Army's scientific priorities. Dr. Baker received his bachelor's degree from Wright State University and his PhD from Tufts University while working at the Air Force Research Laboratory. And with this, I would like to start our seminar. Now the audience is more or less here. And first of all, let me give the microphone to John Brame. For your John presentation, I'm now trying to open the presentation in the full screen mode.
There we go. Thanks. Can you move back up to the top slide? So thank you, Sergey, and thanks to everyone who has joined us today, talking about a joint call for proposals with the U.S. Army Research Lab. As Sergey mentioned, we have three speakers today. I will walk you through the process of how to apply for funding with the Army. And then Sarah and Paul will talk about some of the specific areas of scientific interest in quantum science and technology. Some of you may have started with a few questions about why the US Army might be funding basic research. Most of the time we think of the US Army in terms of tanks and helicopters and soldiers, of which there's no shortage. However, the US Army Futures Command is also responsible for the future development of capabilities. And a part of that future development includes science and technology through the Development Command, and the fundamental wing of the Developmental Command is the Army Research Lab. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Sergey. The Development Command is made up of 8 labs and centers, each of which does a wide variety of basic and applied research across a lot of different disciplines. You can see those kind of columns laid out here for those 8 labs and centers, each of them working in a specific domain space. the Armament Center, Aviation and Missile Center, Chemical Biological Center, C5ISR Center, Data Analysis Center, Ground Vehicle System Center, and Soldier Center all work in relatively applied spaces. And the Army Research Lab is the corporate lab for the US Army, providing fundamental research support to all of those capability areas. So while we do have quite a few research capabilities in, for example, explosives and autonomous vehicles, we also have a very large capability in fundamental science supporting all of those capabilities, which includes materials, biology, computer science, and very relevant to today's conversation, quantum. You can see a lot of the areas here on the slide. The text is quite small. Sergey, you can share these slides with everybody on the call today, and that's not a problem. So while we have a rather large capability within the US, we also recognize that there are great ideas and fantastic scientists and researchers outside the US who perform invaluable work in pushing forward science and technology. On the left, you can see, as just one indication of that, a graphic that shows the distribution of top universities around the world. And only 1/3 of those top universities are located in the United States, 2/3 outside the United States, and half of them are in my area of interest, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Yeah, you can stay on this slide for a minute. So what is our interest in partnering with researchers outside the United States? It's basically summed up in the 3 words that go along the bottom there above the logos. First and foremost is awareness. We want to be aware of capabilities that are being developed, new discoveries that are happening all around the world, in part so we're not surprised by new technologies that come about on the battlefield. That's never a good place to be surprised. We're also interested in engagement and working with and partnering with researchers from around the world. I have found, certainly in my own scientific career, that most of the time innovation happens at the intersection, whether that's intersections between disciplines or frequently intersections between people from different backgrounds and different places, and bringing together people from around the world to participate in scientific discovery increases that opportunity for innovation. And then the third, and in my opinion, most important reason for this international collaboration opportunity is to establish relationships. We work for the Army, so we're in the business of war and peace, but it's my strong belief that peace is much more of an option when we have strong connections, and science can provide an opportunity for those connections. And by partnering with our allies around the world, we can establish strong partnerships that hopefully can avoid future conflict. Certainly something that you all are very aware of at the moment. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the way that we do this partnership is through a standing call for proposals. It's called a broad agency announcement, or BAA. When you get the slides, the underlined portion there right below the title is a hyperlink, so you can click directly to the broad agency announcement, but it's also very easy to find on Google. If you just type in ARL and BAA, the very first link that comes up will be this broad agency announcement, which again is US government speak for a standing call for proposals. I put a couple of screenshots of the BAA website here on the screen. To the left, you see the welcome page. And if you click that little black button that says browse current BAA topics, it'll bring you to the screen on the right, which gives you the opportunity to look at all the areas of interest and filter by topic area or search by keywords. There are dozens and dozens of topics of interest. Sarah and Paul will talk about a couple of those in a little bit more detail in a moment, but there's an enduring record here on the website where you can just click on one of those topic areas and read a 3 or 4 paragraph summary of the type of areas that we're interested in various topics. The next slide shows a brief list of the type of topics that we're interested in. And as you can see, it's extremely broad. I know many people who are experts in quantum science have complementary interests in a lot of other areas, whether that be materials or biology or chemistry. And so you may find interesting topic areas in other parts of the broad agency announcement that are not specific to physics and quantum. So please feel free to use that search function to find keywords that are of interest to you. Yeah, go ahead and move on to that next one, Sergey. So we award three different types of awards through this call for proposals. The first and most standard is a research project, very similar to what you might get through a European Council or a National Science Foundation, where you apply for funding, we provide funding for you to do research and publish the results. The typical award is somewhere on the order of $100,000 per year for 3 years. The amount changes quite a bit depending on costs locally. Obviously, research in London is quite a bit more expensive than research in Nairobi, but we provide funding predominantly for researchers, postdocs, students, some supplies, typically not a lot of facilities, but mostly focused on the people and the work that they do. And they tend to last 3 years to support postdocs and graduate students. The second type of award that we provide is a travel grant. So this is an opportunity for you as a scientist outside the US to receive funding to travel to the US and visit with some of our researchers and scientists in the Army Research Lab or some of those other centers that I talked about, and to talk about your research interests, to talk about our research interests, perhaps give a technical seminar to some of our team, and discuss potential future research opportunities, perhaps via a research grant. The third award type is conference support. So we also fund typically small, specific conferences that are looking at a very interesting topic area. So not an IEEE or APS type conference, but more bespoke, topically specific workshops that are looking at a specific area and trying to understand what is the current state of the science and where is the science headed in that topic. The dollar amount that you see there is suggestive, $3,000 to $10,000 to help pay for maybe a venue, maybe a couple of invited speakers, and defray some of those conference costs. So those are the type of awards. Let's go ahead to the next slide and talk about how you could potentially receive such an award. We certainly recognize that it is a large undertaking for academics, writing proposals for research grants. And frequently you spend months writing a 30 to sometimes 100-page proposal and submit it into a void and wait sometimes months only to hear that you've been rejected without a whole lot of feedback. That can be quite frustrating, even though it is certainly a relatively normal part of the academic landscape. We have tried to simplify that process a little bit by starting with a pre-proposal or a white paper. So once you know that we exist, that's the initial contact. Today serves that function. You now know that you could potentially apply for funding through the Army. Rather than writing up a full proposal and submitting it to that broad agency announcement, we ask that you send us a short white paper or pre-proposal between 1 and 3 pages that focuses on what you would like to accomplish. Why is it interesting research? What is the scientific question you're trying to answer? What is the hypothesis you're proposing? Very briefly, how you will test that hypothesis and why that question is interesting within the scientific community. We can then relatively quickly review that white paper or pre-proposal and potentially provide an answer, hey, this isn't necessarily aligned with our interests, without you having worked out a whole 30-page full proposal. Or potentially we may come back and say, hey, this is interesting. Would you tell me a little bit more about how you might go about doing this? You may ask some detailed technical questions and have some additional conversation. If that technical discussion results in our extended interest, we would then invite you to submit a full proposal against the broad agency announcement. The full proposal, does come with the anticipated paperwork and quite a bit of hassle. However, when we invite you to submit a full proposal, we typically have already lined up the funding on the back end, and we anticipate being able to award that. So we're able to fund almost 90% of the full proposals that are invited in this way by starting with the white paper. So that full proposal is submitted. It goes through a full review that includes a technical academic review, financial review, also a security review. Once it passes all of those, we make the award. You conduct the research and then publish the results. The timeline for this process can vary quite a bit. It depends a little bit on how busy our team is. It depends a little bit on how long it may take you to go from that pre-proposal to a full proposal. The review can take a little while. I would say on the very short end, we can go from the very beginning of this process to an award in as little as 3 months. More typical is in the realm of 6 months, maybe 8 months. And sometimes we may be interested in an idea, but we don't have money this year. So we'll kind of hold on to it until our next fiscal year and fund it a little bit later. So it can take a while. But my role as the international representative is to help you with all the administrative parts in the background, while you can work with some of our technical experts like Sarah and Paul that we'll talk to you here in a little bit on the technical parts. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. We'll have time for questions and answers in a little bit, but a couple of the questions that always come up, we'll go ahead and head those off. People frequently ask about intellectual property. We do not take intellectual property from the awards that we provide. The intellectual property remains with the university or the individual, depending on who's applying and what their organizational rules are. We do retain what's called government purpose rights, which is almost like a non-exclusive license. So we've paid for the development of this idea, so we can use it internally, but we can't sell it, we can't share it. You can sell it, you can share it, you can patent it, you can license it to other individuals or companies, etc. The other question people frequently ask is, can the results be published? The answer is absolutely yes. We are not trying to, nor are we actually able to fund research that is classified or confidential. Our goal is to fund research that can be published in the open literature and advance the scientific community for everyone in the world. Obviously, we have some interest in the areas that we support progressing into areas of interest for the US Army, but we fully recognize that basic research has a lot of potential downstream applications, and there will be many civilian applications, further scientific discovery, et cetera, and we fully welcome that. One more slide. The last kind of technical slide before my get off the stage slide talks just a little bit about what makes a successful white paper or pre-proposal. Again, these are relatively short, not a lot of depth and detail needed. So you really want to kind of pack a punch in a relatively short time. So what can do that? I'll highlight just a couple of these questions. And again, you'll have access to these slides, so you're welcome to look at them in depth. Number one, the bottom left there, so what, who cares? This should be a really interesting scientific problem, right? We'll be sharing this with experts in the field, so you don't have to worry that it's too niche or esoteric. If it's interesting in your community, it likely will catch the interest of our program managers, but it needs to be an interesting scientific question. It should also be hard, right? I have relatively strong confidence in your ability to fund kind of the next incremental step in your research. So rather than that, please send us a hard challenge. What could you do to skip the next step and jump to a revolutionary kind of blue sky type breakthrough? The other thing that is really important in these white papers is the top right. Why you and why now? Obviously, using US taxpayer dollars to fund research outside the US requires a little bit of motivation. What is it about you that is uniquely positioned to answer this scientific question? Do you have a unique data set? Do you have a unique capability? Do you have a unique collaboration? Do you have access to unique materials? Is it just that you happen to be the world expert in the niche area in which you work? Highlight why it's important that you do this research, in addition to it's important that the research be done. Okay, and my last slide, if you'll go ahead and move on to the next. The process is relatively informal. You don't have to submit the white paper through a fancy portal. You can send it by email to me. The email there on the left is us.army.grants@army.mil. If you use your phone and scan the QR code that's on the screen, it should load my contact details into your phone. The other thing that I will say is that while the Army has these programs for basic science, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Corps of Engineers also have broad agency announcements and are interested in funding basic science. If you send a white paper to me, I will also share it with my colleagues in the Navy, the Air Force, and the Corps of Engineers who sit in the same building with me in London. It may be that the Army is not interested in your research, but perhaps the Navy is. And so we're more than happy to share that white paper, that idea with our colleagues. They may end up funding it instead of us, or sometimes we end up funding projects together between the different services. So one submission kind of goes to 4 different calls for proposals. So hopefully that all made sense, running through the administrative portion of how to work with the Army. In a minute here, we will talk with a little bit more depth about the technical types of things that we're looking for. So I will pause here for any urgent questions before turning the time over to Sarah and then Paul.
Thank you very much, John, for the very interesting talk. It is maybe somewhat unexpected to many that the US Army Research Office can fund research, even fundamental research in Ukraine. And hopefully this news and all the related information is interesting and useful to our researchers. Now questions to John, please, before we go ahead. Andrei, please.
Thank you. So I would like to ask about support for travel. Could you name a few characteristic cases? What kind of travel support, and is it visiting conference or other activity?
Yeah, so typically the travel awards are to visit with Army researchers as opposed to just go to a generic conference. There does need to be some connection to Army mission. It could be that you have coordinated with an Army researcher and plan to meet up with them at a workshop or a conference in the US, in which case we can certainly fund that. The things that we cover for travel, we cover transportation to and from the airport, flights, rental car at the location, hotel while you stay, and per diem amounts for food and incidental expenses. So it's relatively comprehensive. We do not pay for your time or salary while you're traveling. That would still have to be covered by your home institution.
Okay, and additional question, is the procedure the same? So you need to apply white paper and then go through the full scheme, or it's simplified in this case?
Yeah, great question. So it starts the same way through a white paper. And maybe I'll expand on your question just a little bit. While we're focusing today on very fundamental science, we have programs for applied research. We have programs kind of across the spectrum. And all 3 programs that I talked about today, research grants, travel grants, and conferences, every single one of those starts with that kind of 1 to 2 page white paper. So send the idea. I will try and find the right bucket to put it in, the right project to apply it towards, the right program managers to send it to. And then we'll go from there to find the right home for it.
Thank you.
Kirill Gorokhovsky, please.
Yeah, hello, Kirill Gorokhovsky here, head of Photonics Cluster Ukraine. I have a question about small conferences support. Could it be like summer quantum computations school for students, or for example, quantum machine learning for signal processing hackathon? We conducted such events in the past, and support would be valuable.
Yeah, so our conference support typically would not fund something that is only educational. While we certainly agree that that's a very important thing to fund, it tends to typically be outside of our scope of interest. However, we frequently fund workshops that include a strong educational component. So if you're going to bring together some experts in a specific discipline to talk about a topic area, it also makes sense to fund students to come participate in that workshop, perhaps have some training opportunities as well. So education as a component, yes. As a standalone, probably not. But you're welcome to send it and we can take a look.
Okay, thank you.
Mykola Bondarenko, please.
I just wanted to ask, are there any specific deadlines for applications?
Yeah, another good question. So The broad agency announcement is always open, so there's not a deadline when to submit a white paper. We do function on a fiscal year cycle. So the US government fiscal year starts in October and goes through September. So at the current moment, most of our program managers are working towards filling up their fiscal year 25 programs. So it's a really good time right now to submit. If you submit something more in the timeframe of April, May, June, it's likely that our fiscal year 25 funding will all be committed. But during that time, we can start thinking about ideas for our next fiscal year program. So if it's a good idea, whenever it's submitted, we'll find a slot for it.
Yeah, thank you.
I also recognize that sometimes for academics, not having a deadline can be much worse than having a deadline that's very close at hand. So if you need to self-impose a deadline to send us a white paper, you're welcome to impose your own deadlines.
Next question from Kyiv Academic University, Alexander Kardyuk, please.
Yeah, hello, Alexander Kardyuk. Yeah, I'm interested about research grants, about the funding. Actually, what is in the budget? Could it be some small equipment, and how can?
Yeah, so typically we don't fund equipment, certainly not large equipment. In some cases, small equipments, a spectroscope or something similar to that is allowed. If it's less than 10 or 15% of the budget, it likely can be approved. If it's more than that, it certainly would require some discussion. The intent of the program is that you're applying for something to which you already have the capability of answering the scientific question. If you need a large piece of equipment in order to answer that scientific question, then maybe we need to tweak and look for something else. But as with most everything, I will say, unless you need $1 million piece of equipment to make it work, if it's something in that range, 10, 15% plus or minus, send in the request. If the science is really interesting, maybe we can help find a partner that already has that equipment, or figure out some way to partially fund the equipment or something. If the science is there, we can often help find a way to get to the scientific program.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no more questions, thank you, John, so much. Let us move further.
Sergey, I'm reminding you about live broadcasting. I think that's the right point to stop.